Today's guest, once lost in addiction, chaos, and criminal activities, he climbed back through discipline, faith, and deep inner work.
I was exposed to criminality, a different way of being, violence and selling drugs, stealing cars. Things sort of went up a few levels, getting more involved with larger thefts of articulated lorries that controlled large amounts of alcohol. In and amongst that, the whole time there was an element of drugs. Selling, taking, getting to a point where I didn't no longer look at myself as a criminal, I looked at myself as a businessman.
When did your addiction begin for you?
Yeah, by sort of age of 13 was when I first tried packet. I got a phone call from my mum's neighbour. He said, "Jeff, your mum's house is being raided." And I just remember sitting in the car thinking, shit, I could be going away for 10 plus years now. That was like the start of the next chapter, the next part of my life.
Elliott Wald, addiction specialist. Coming clean with me.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Coming Clean with Me. My name is Elliott Wald, addiction specialist, and today's guest has overcome addictions to the packet, to food and alcohol, losing over half his body weight, 222 kilos to 114 kilos. Once lost in addiction, chaos and criminal activities, he climbed back through discipline, faith and deep inner work, becoming a present father, a community leader and founder of the Actualization Project, helping youths reclaim their life, resilience and purpose. Please welcome Jeff Charles. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Elliot.
No intro.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you for coming here, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
Let's kick off. Tell me a little bit about how you were brought up, where you were born, siblings, background, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I guess quite a ordinary upbringing in some aspects in today's society. Single parent household. Born in Harold Wood Hospital. Lived in Ilford, Dagenham. My mum, I've got a twin brother, got a little sister. Just a sort of a very loving home. My mum was amazing, absolutely incredible. Brought us up from the age of 5 on her own, single-handedly. Very little input from my dad. Spent a lot of time in and around the outer sort of East London outskirts, eventually moving to sort of rural Essex, near Burnham on Crouch, and sort of that was probably aged around 8, I think, roughly. And just sort of relatively the earlier sort of childhood, there was a lot of chaos around at the time when my mum was with my dad, and that was sort of one of the reasons why my mum eventually made the decision to leave and do it on her own, so she could give us a level of stability that we didn't have previously. And from there, I guess things started to sort of unravel for me personally. I'd say when I got to probably aged 11, and it's when I started noticing things, I guess, because up until then we're quite innocent, aren't we? We don't really pay that much attention to the finer detail. And I think it wasn't until I got into sort of secondary school, year 7, when I started realising how things were different for us compared to my peers and other friends. And I guess that was the start of the journey, I guess, to which you alluded to earlier, the addiction and the problems that I sort of ended up facing.
What was school like for you? Were you
So-
a high achiever? Did you mess about?
I was always told by my teachers in primary school and secondary school that I've got so much potential if I were just to apply that potential. So I was diagnosed with ADHD relatively quite at a young age, end of year 6.
What age is that for me? I don't know.
So it's like 10.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think back then, so, 24 years ago, I feel really old saying that, 24 years ago, ADHD wasn't as sort of mainstream as it is now. The information available, the knowledge was nowhere near what it is now. And so when I got that diagnosis, I was very much treated almost, I felt like an alien. So for instance, I was encouraged to sit in a hula hoop in school so that I wouldn't fidget and I wouldn't move outside the hula hoop and disturb other students. And this hula hoop became this sort of safe space for me, but at the same time, in a way, it became like a fortress. I felt very segregated, and I guess that feeling of feeling segregated and feeling different carried on then into secondary school. And one thing that come up for me a lot was I had a problem with authority. Um, and I think that came from the lack of having a present dad, that father figure, positive male role model in my life, that when authority tried to come down on me, I would often reject it and, protest. And so that then carried on into secondary school. And another thing I had a problem with injustice and bullies. So that was another thing that I was sort of battling with. I didn't like people taking advantage of people. I didn't like people bullying people. Would often get in trouble for sticking up for people, some people that I don't even know, or getting myself involved in stuff that didn't concern me, because of this sense of injustice. And I think it was like by the middle of year 8, so I would have then been 12. I essentially was removed from school permanently. And back then, there was a program, I guess it was called work-related learning. So what that meant is that I had to find an employer that would employ me at that age, non-paid, and I would work 4 days a week. And then I was allowed to go into school on a Friday for 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours in a segregated building. We called it the house. And that's where we done some curriculum and academia. So then I could then achieve basic GCSEs. That very quickly faded out by year 9, sort of very rarely went in on the Fridays. But yeah, so school didn't last very long, in terms of secondary school anyway.
It says, just reading through my notes, in terms of your teenage years, you felt the pressure to live up to a criminal persona, to be the tough guy, the street guy. Explain to me what you mean by that.
So what happened was when I got into secondary school, I started recognizing things, started seeing things, and a realization, I guess, happened where I realized that we didn't have a lot at home, and it became more prominent then. In the sense that I had friends that would have the latest trainers, they'd go away on holiday, they'd always have money in their pocket, etc., etc. So that became a bit of a problem for me. I became quite resentful, not at the people, but at that fact. And with that resentment, there came anger, and I guess a appetite for wanting more. And in doing so, I looked at different ways of achieving, getting those things. And essentially, when I did get removed from school, I started working, building site, labourer. And of course, in that environment at a young age, 12, 13, I'm working with older guys in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s. Some of these guys are criminals themselves. And of course, being a young man, not having that father figure, I was craving that. I wanted that. I wanted that positive male role model. I wanted somebody that I could look up to, someone that would take me under their wing, look after me, so to speak. So that's what I did. I found people that would, in a sense, look after me. In their own little way, they did. But at the same time, then I was exposed to criminality. I was exposed to a sort of a different way of being.
Such as?
I guess in a way I was like at that age, I was quite impressionable, and I was exposed to, violence and criminality and in selling drugs or stealing cars. So I looked up to these guys. I thought they were, amazing, great men. And in their own way, not to take that away from them, in their own way, they had things about them that were admirable. They did. Had a level of resilience, a level of honor amongst thieves, so to speak. And I guess it was then for me, I was like, well, I want to be like these guys, I want to get to the level that they're at. I want to become like them. And then with that, there became this sort of pull and push of characters within myself. So I had the real me, the true me, and then this version of me that I wanted to become based on those that surrounded me and that I looked up to. And that wasn't a healthy. It wasn't a healthy way to be, I guess, because getting involved in that criminality.
Or did you actually have to get involved doing it? Just hypothetically.
So hypothetically speaking, very at the beginning, I guess it was low level sort of stuff. It was like diggers and plant, stealing diggers and plant, repurposing them, selling them on. And it sort of then things sort of went up a few levels, like getting more involved with larger thefts of perhaps articulated lorries that contained large amounts of alcohol. And then it really then started, and I guess in and amongst that, the whole time there was an element of drugs, whether it be packet or cannabis, selling, taking. So that element of that was always weaved in throughout that criminality. And it was an easy way to make money. It was an easy way to make money. But it came at a cost. It came at a cost that I didn't realise at the time. And so then this persona, this person that I was slowly becoming, this sort of person who believed that to be successful I had to be feared, I had to be respected, I had to be violent, to sort of make decisions without fearing the consequences of those decisions. Be erratic.
Such as?
If someone perhaps owed money, you'd go to extreme measures to get that money back through acts of violence, through acts of fear and threatening people. You sort of wanted to be known as that person that would get things done. And if they said something, they'd follow through with action, But whilst all of this was going on, and again, this spanned a long time. This went on for 10 years. Started off at a very low level of criminality. As you can imagine, the usual sort of stuff in pubs and bits and pieces. And ended up sort of then getting to a point where I didn't no longer look at myself as a criminal, as a drug dealer. I looked at myself as a businessman. As you do, you sort of think, I'm not a drug dealer, and you try and justify your actions by giving yourself a different title, or perhaps investing into businesses or starting businesses to legitimize the money that you've got and to make yourself feel better, essentially. And that's what I did eventually. I got to a certain level where I was no longer one of the sort of low-level lads in the pubs and bars and clubs or out on the street. I was sort of moving up higher in the food chain, I guess. And so then, but whilst all of this time over this 10-year period, this everything that I was doing played heavily on me, because I knew what I was doing was immoral, it was unethical, it was illegal, And every single day there was this battle between, my conscience, I know what I'm doing is wrong, but yet I still carry on doing it.
Devil on one shoulder, angel on the other.
Exactly.
No, I shouldn't do that, but go on, just do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And obviously with that, when you've got them two things going at each other, it creates a lot of psychological tension, because again, it's that sort of, you've got your true self and your ideal self. And I remember that every single day I'll be living like in a state of heightened awareness and anxiety. And at the time I didn't know it. I just felt very hyper vigilant, very alert and aware that at any moment the ground beneath my feet could just fall away. And that wasn't a nice way to live, you know. Yeah, it was difficult, because I'd wake up every day and I'd thank God. I'd be like, thank you for this day, and please help me get through this day. And at the end of the day, I'll be like, thank you again for helping me survive another day, because that was the reality of it. If it wasn't, if it weren't getting killed, it would be getting arrested, losing my freedom, losing my liberty. Then obviously family come into it, then you start worrying about, because by sort of towards the end of that criminality, I was a dad, I had one son, and my then partner was pregnant with my second son. And so I was in this predicament of, if I carry on doing what I'm doing, I'm potentially going to be leaving my children in the same position that I was in without an active father. And they then, the cycle doesn't break. But even I knew these facts, I still didn't stop. And I think that's the thing as well with that lifestyle and all that whole area of criminality, is that I think it can be harder to stop being involved in that criminality than it can be to stop actually doing the drug that you might be taking. Because it's that then becomes sort of an addiction in itself. The highs and lows of that lifestyle. The fast pace, the quick money, the reputation, the glamour. But then what you don't see beneath the surface is the dark side of that, the impact that you have on people around you, your own family, people that perhaps that you sell to.
When did your addiction begin for you?
So I guess it, from a very young age, I remember in year 7, like within the first,
Which is age?
11.
Okay.
I remember in year 7, being at the bus stop and like it was an older lad there who would get on the same bus, and he would smoke in the telephone box. And I remember like trying and smoking a joint then. And then I started sort of smoking cannabis at that age, on and off. And then by sort of age, I'd say 13 was when I first tried cocaine, packet. And at that point, it was like, it was something, because I was so young.
Hold on. 13? How did that come about?
It was a friend, older friend, again on a building site, and it was something that was sort of being passed around, and it was like, oh, do you want a bump? And I just thought, well, yeah, I'll try it, not really knowing. And I remember doing it, and I was just like, it felt really weird, and strangely enough, at that age, at that time, it didn't grab a hold of me then. It didn't, because it was like, then from the age of 13 till I was like 17, it was sort of one of those things where I could take it or leave it. And I guess it was like the addiction took hold was when, as I got older and sort of was involved, it was always around me. It was literally always around me. There was always it was always available. So
You were in that world.
exactly, yeah. And it had become a norm. It became a social norm, not just for myself, but my circle, my social circle, my friends. For instance, go and pick up on a Thursday. Might go and pick up a kilo, and then you'd break that down. And then what I'd do is I'd break it all down, and then I might take out half ounce for me, and then that would be my bit. And so I always knew I had that there on tap, to use as and when I wanted to. And that's the thing. It's like it happened very gradually, slowly crept up, and it would become, very like the day would, start off. We get up, might go for breakfast, we go to the gym, then we might have lunch, and then after lunch that would be it. A little bump, little line, then that would carry on throughout the day into the night. And one thing that I was always good at was I wasn't sort of one. Very very rarely, once in a blue moon, I wouldn't go through the night. I wouldn't do like an all night. I would stop, might be 2-3 in the morning, but I would always sleep because I knew the next day I had to be active. I had things to do. But then it became very normalised, and it was just something that was done. It was like read you for a bottle of water, and yeah, it was insidious. It just not just my own life, but my friends, my circle that I was in. It sort of infiltrated everybody's life, very gradually. And I've lost friends through the packet, through suicide, through a car accident when they're on their way to pack it up, so there's been a lot of loss around it as well.
What was going on emotionally at that time when you were using it, and what was going on in your life emotionally?
If I'm honest, Elliot, I think at that stage in my life, I couldn't have named the emotions that I was feeling, and what I felt and what I thought, because I was so wrapped up in that life, and I wasn't aware of anything other than I knew I needed to carry on doing what I was doing, and I was sort of, I did, the business that I had, I built from scratch, so it was like my baby, and that essentially I put that first over everything. But if I look back now and I reflect and I think about the emotions I was feeling, I think I was feeling extremely insecure, anxious, scared, very lost. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I was just living moment to moment, day to day. And I think again, it's that persona of this man that I thought I should be, this sort of alpha male, flash, violent, angry, that I'd become, pushed me so much further away from the man that I knew I could be. And even at that stage, for all of the addiction and for the chaos, for the violence, the man that I could be, there was glimpses of him. There was glimpses. In my core, I was still a good person, but I was just doing shit things.
Tell me about your journey with the packet then, how that escalated, where it got to with alcohol, without alcohol. Tell me about that journey.
So when I first started using the packet regularly, the first couple of years I didn't really drink with it, and I always remember going out, being with a group of friends, and bearing in mind I must be like, I'm like 16 at this point, and they were in their 30s and 40s, and I had a fake ID, so I used to use that to get into clubs or bars. And one of my really really close friends, Luke, he knew that I didn't really drink. He knew, But then like his friends would be like, why are you not drinking? Why are you not drinking? I'd just be like, oh, I don't really like it. I don't really want to drink. I just like doing the packet, and that's me. I'm sweet. And I was fine doing that. And that was for the first couple of years. And then eventually I gave in to the alcohol, and it became one of those things of like, one without the other. You couldn't have a drink without a packet. You couldn't have a packet without a drink. It's like bread and butter. You had to be together. And again, that escalated and escalated, where I was using pretty much every day, to the point where I remember like laying in bed, and I had a bed with like a wood surrounding base, and I remember sort of at this point I must be like 30 stone, and I'd lean over, and on the wood I'd have a few lines wrapped up, and I'd just lean over and just sniff and then lay back down.
Wow, not even moving?
No.
Do you think you were still stuck in the hula hoop from school?
I think that hula hoop, I think that sort of representation of that sort of that circle of being, most definitely, I was stuck in this regimented obsession of being this person, and using to numb what was really going on for me.
And at your worst, what did your addiction look like? What did your day look like?
Not getting out of bed till late morning, not looking after myself. And with the packet, the thing is, it's like you're never giving yourself a chance to catch up. So you're never, your brain is completely depleted of any dopamine. So you're just you're on autopilot almost. And in your body, you end up eating crap food. It's that vicious circle. It's like you're never giving yourself a chance to breathe. And you'd sort of get through as much as you could of the day until you then do your first line or your first bump, and then that whole vicious cycle starts again. And I remember multiple occasions, I'm laying there and I'm thinking, if I carry on like this, I'm gonna kill over. Like, there's no way I can carry on eating what I eat, drinking what I drink, sniffing what I'm sniffing, being 30 odd stone.
What sort of quantity were you sniffing by this point, and how frequently?
So I was never a morning sniffer. It would always be after lunch. It was like an unwritten rule that I had. It was always after lunch. And it would be every 20 minutes, a line, a bump. And I'd say the quantity, because I was always with a group of people as well, the quantity could vary. It could vary from a Henry to 3.5 grams to 7 grams a day.
Because you're sharing it, is what you meant.
Yeah,
I understand.
Yeah, and sometimes it could be more than that, depending on what we was doing.
What made you decide to stop? Was it legal trouble? Was it conscience? What was that?
So there was many moments throughout that period of my life. There were like signs. They were moments. They were like moments where I could have walked away, but I didn't. And those moments would come, and then they'd go, and I didn't walk away. And then there was one moment, and I was sitting in my car, and I hadn't long just picked up, and it was a Thursday, and I got a phone call from my mum's neighbour, and he said, Jeff, your mum's house is being raided. And this is the first time that it had ever been raided. And I just remember coming off the phone thinking, shit, they've got me. And I always prided myself in how careful I was you know, in that business, you can't be making enemies. You have to make more friends than you do enemies, because those enemies are just gonna, you know, they just grass you up. You know, it's the quickest way to get rid of someone. So the more allies you had, the more friends you had, you know, keep the equilibrium, keep it level. And I was quite under the radar as well, and I always, you know, I thought, "Oh, I've always covered all bases, you know, I'm careful." And yeah, so my mum's got raided, and I just remember coming to the phone, and in that moment, my ex then was 7 months pregnant with my second son. And I just remember sitting in the car thinking, shit, like, I could be going away for 10 plus years now, and I'm going to be leaving my kids in a position where they could end up following in my footsteps, because I'm not around to guide them. I'm not there to teach them. I'm not there to help them. And it was from that moment, that one phone call, and that one moment, I decided enough's enough. I'm stopping. And I then spent like a week in different places, staying in hotels, because in my head I thought, okay, the police raided my mum's. They didn't find anything. I thought, you know, they're just looking for me now. And so I completely come away from any investments that I had, any sort of legitimate businesses, any investments. I sort of, over the space of a week, I got rid of everything. I sold everything, in the idea that, you know, that any money that I collected in, you know, that I had, would then be put away whilst I was in prison, so that my kids and my then partner could survive, essentially. And then that never came. You know, you know, nothing ever come of that. I managed to walk away, and I guess that chapter of that, then my life, then that's where it ended. You know, the criminality.
And you carried on using.
Yeah.
What was your lowest point with your using?
I would say it would have been after the breakdown of my family. So at this point, the breakdown started probably in late 2017. And at this point, I was a father of 3. And I left my family home and I had nothing. So I was living in a spare room of one of my best friend's houses, Chris. And I had nothing. I literally had nothing. I had to start again. I had to come to terms with the fact that I am going to be a part-time dad, which was something that I never wanted. And that caused me to spiral massively. I felt like a failure. I felt ashamed. Yeah, I was extremely lost and low. And in reality, at this point, after I left the criminality, I went into the gas industry. So at this point, I'd been in the gas industry then for like 4 or 5 years. And I was doing well, like, in terms of career. So on paper, you know, I've got 3 beautiful children, career's good. But I was, you know, family had broken down. I was in my mate's spare room and I had nothing. And that then become, you know, a very, very long period of depression, suicidal ideation, and using, you know, and obviously using, doing packet only perpetuates that mood and that, you know, cycle of thought. I guess a little while after that, I managed to get a flat, and I was in this flat, you know, things were getting better, but I was still using. At this point, I was 34, 35 stone. things had settled a little bit with my then ex, and the contact with my kids was, regular, stable, but I was still deeply, deeply unhappy, still carrying a lot. I was ashamed of myself, and a lot of that came from how I was physically, how I looked. I was extremely overweight, didn't look after myself, I took no real pride in how I looked, and was still using. And I think that I remember going to pick the kids up from school, and I'd walk in, and I was like, I was the biggest guy, the biggest, the fattest dad there. And I just remember just feeling so ashamed, and just be like, my kids have got like the fattest dad, and eventually there's going to get a point where, as they get older, that they could get bullied for having a fat, overweight dad, and just all of these thoughts going on in my head, all of this shame and guilt, and feeling like a failure. And there was a moment where I took the kids to a soft play. And I tried my, I was a big guy, but I tried my best to be active and run around with them and stuff. So I'm chasing them around the soft play as you do, sweating and huffing and puffing. And I remember this young lad that sort of ended up joining, playing in with my kids, and he's playing along like they do. And he said to me, he looked at me, he goes, "Wow, you're so fat," like that, in front of my kids. And obviously, he's an innocent child, but they've got no filter if they say it at his. And my eldest son looked at him, and he said, "My dad's not fat. He's just a giant." And in that moment, I was like, "Oh, shit. My son is defending me. My son is defending me." And I just felt so ashamed, so angry with myself. And when we were getting back to my flat, just crying, and then they went home, and I just thought to myself, do you know what? I can't have this. They're better off without me. That's how I felt, And I remember getting some packet, and I was sniffing and sniffing, and I just thought to myself, enough's enough. That's it. I'm done. I'm done with this. I'm done with feeling how I'm feeling. And I'd convinced myself that the kids would be better off without me. That's where I got to. And I filmed like a series of videos, different videos, put out 14 in total. Video for like their wedding, for when they pass their GCSEs, for when they get their first boyfriend or girlfriend, for times when they're feeling down, when they're feeling low. Like a video of me, just talking. One of the videos is ironically is like me saying to him, through life you're going to get hurdles and you're going to have obstacles, but you've got to get through them, you've got to jump over them. And I'm giving him this encouragement. I'm filming these videos moments before I try to take my own life. I'm encouraging them to persevere and get through life.
Ironic.
Exactly, yeah. So I'd say that was the lowest point that I got to, where I tried to take my own life, and
What was the turning point?
I think after that event, I had a really sort of deep moment of reflection and introspection, and looking back and thinking about all of the things that have happened to me, all of the events, all of the violence, the pain that was inflicted on me and that I inflicted on others, moments where life could have gone a very different way for me, and it hadn't. And I said to myself, there has to be a reason for that. I've survived this attempted suicide. I've survived everything that I've survived up until this point, and there has to be a reason for that. And that, from that moment, that was like the start of the next chapter, the next part of my life, where I took control back. and made the decision that tomorrow I'm not going to drink that beer. I'm not going to sniff that line. Then the next day, I might say, I'm not going to drink that can of Coke. You know, so day by day, decision by decision, I was making the steps towards the man that I knew I could become, and the man I knew I was deep down. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I just knew day by day.
What was your first sign of recovery?
The power to say no. The first time I turned down an invite out, that was like a really big moment. You know, it's like, because I always used to suffer with like FOMO, you know, fear of missing out. And, you know, when you got friends and bits and pieces that people are saying, you know, oh, do you fancy going out? Oh, do you fancy getting a bit packet? Should we, you know, have a few?
Should we get on it, mate?
Yeah. Should we have a cheeky one? Just a couple, and then we'll call it a day, you know, that. And I think the moment that I said no, that became addictive almost, having that autonomy to say no, having the power, taking the control back. You know, from having something that had control over me for so long, then for me to be able to take that control back and be the captain of the ship. That was, and it wasn't like it wasn't neat and tidy, the journey. You know, it wasn't like a straight linear journey of, like, you know, recovery. It wasn't. It was messy. There was moments I fell down. There was moments I fell short. But they were moments in time, and that was the big thing for me. You know, it was realizing that these moments don't define what tomorrow's going to look like. Our past actions and things that I've done doesn't define the person I am. That was when things really started to change.
Good for you. I'm just going to change this up a little bit, because I sent you an impulsivity test. I thought it'd be interesting to do an impulsivity test on you, just for yourself and for people listening or watching. Let me just explain this. So with every one of my patients, I run a whole series of psychological diagnostic tests, ADHD, impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, and then build a case history from that to understand the patient, to understand their values, their beliefs, their experiences, their upbringing, trauma, and from there build a whole case individually. So one of the small components is the impulsivity test. So I thought it'd be fun to send you the impulsivity test and then to diagnose you on the podcast. So your score was 62, okay? And I've analysed this for you. This sits in the average range. This means you're not wildly impulsive overall, but you're also not especially restrained. In terms of addiction, an average score often shows someone who can think ahead, but doesn't always do it consistently. It's like you can see the future, but you're not always consistent in your actions to get to the future. Okay, you especially feel boredom or emotional discomfort, and I think emotional discomfort is interesting just reading you. And with nasal ingestion of this level of impulsiveness, it lines up with binge-style patterns, which is really interesting based upon what you said. Long stretches of control followed by moments where urges override planning, which is exactly what you've been talking about. And I did this before we went and before we discussed. Your attention is number 9. This is around the mid-range. It suggests someone who can focus, but is easily pulled off track when stressed, tired, or overwhelmed. In real life, it shows up as losing the thread of task, drifting during conversations, or finding it hard to stay locked onto one thing for long. With nasal ingestion of It's kind of like that cycle takes you back down that track. Your cognitive instability, number 6. This slightly leans towards the lower side. It means the mind is fairly steady, doesn't jump all over the place, and your thoughts are slightly less spirally than they could be at that level. But your thoughts are also unpredictable. And then your motor score, which is 14, is a high score, pointing to more action-driven impulsivity. It means you act quickly, sometimes before thinking. And this looks like things on the spur of the moment. You do things without much thought about them, which is one of the massive traits of people who have an addiction, okay? Your strongest behavior predictor is you have sudden urges to do something and you respond to them without that gap of, or without thinking about that gap between should I and doing. That gap is slightly missing. It's smaller. Self-control is 13. It's on the higher side, suggesting a good ability to plan, which fits in with work, etc., right? Anticipate consequences in terms of being sober, calm states, and you're being more responsible and measurable in your decisions. And you're also able to delay gratification. That's one of the huge components of using, that it's instant gratification. I need this right now.
Yeah.
And one of the coping strategies for dealing with, you know what, is to be able to delay gratification. And that's what you're able to do. Cognitive complexity, 12. This sits above average. It reflects someone who makes nuances, makes connections, and can handle multiple streams of information in day-to-day life. It's like you're pretty switched on, right? Looks good for problem solving, strong reasoning, and the ability to understand situations from different angles. In addiction behavior, higher complexity can sometimes mean overthinking, that's certainly you, or rationalizing, creating elaborate internal arguments to justify one more night. I'll just do it again, just tonight. So overall, this is what I've written. The total score and pattern shows someone whose impulsiveness is mainly driven by behavioral impulse rather than emotional chaos. They can think rationally, plan well, but their action impulses and dips in perseverance. It creates cracks. So there's cracks within that. You have to focus, concentrate on that. This combination is common in people who function at a high level in daily life, yet struggle privately with nasal ingestion of you-know-what, especially moments of emotional fatigue and reward-seeking behaviour. How does that sound?
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. A lot of that rings true. Yeah, a lot of that rings true. Most definitely. Yeah. Insightful, Elliot. Yeah.
And how do you stay sober today?
I think the main thing I always think about now is the consequences of that. If I was to decide to pack it, how I would feel tomorrow, the moment you sober up. And that feeling and that place is something that I never want to revisit. And that really helps me to stay true to myself. And I think the other thing is like my purpose and what I'm doing, with my duty, not just as someone who's working with individuals, but as a father and as a partner, that comes above everything else.
Do you have a certain routine though to stay sober, to stay clean? Are there certain things you put in place, certain things you do?
I think I don't go out hardly ever now. I was quite sociable. I'd always go out, events, etc. But now it's something that I don't do. It doesn't interest me, so I keep myself out of environments that may be perhaps triggering.
Okay.
But also prayer as well. My faith is something that's carried me through all of this and has been a quiet anchor that I didn't really realize that I had. That's something that's become a really prominent part of my life now. So, prayer, meditation,
Mm-hmm.
being grounded, reflective processes, journaling, um, speaking.
Do you enjoy journaling?
I do, yeah, I do. Um, I journal, I journal through voice. So I record myself talking.
Do you go back and listen to it?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I transcribe it once it's been recorded, and I could be in the car and I'll just press record, and I could have a moment, an introspective thought or feeling, and I'll record it and I'll talk about it. Um, and I think therapy as well has played a big part in it. Seeking therapy and doing
Mm-hmm.
that work, as uncomfortable as that is and it can be. I think that's played a massive role in my recovery and the success of my recovery, and you know brotherhood as well, being around like-minded individuals, people that are on a similar path perhaps of recovery or of self-improvement, and having that level of self-awareness.
Okay. If you could transport yourself back
Mm.
to when you first started using, what is the one golden nugget that you would tell your younger self?
Cool. I'd probably start off by saying, you're stronger than what you think. Yeah, you're stronger than what you think, and that you'll be okay. Um, Listen to that feeling, because throughout my life I've had this feeling. There's been something there, and and not up until the last couple of years I've never really been able to name what that was. Something scratching at the surface, something knocking at the door. It's always been there, constantly. Something inside me saying, there's more than this. There's more. There's something else going on. You're you can do better than this. You're better than this. And I'd always try and shut it up. And it's been like a quiet strength that's been in me throughout my life, that's somehow helped me bounce back from multiple things multiple times. And I would say to my younger self, you need to listen to that, and you need to hold on to it, and you need to fan the flame, you need to nurture it. And that's what I would say to others as well, is like, if there is something inside you that's telling you that what you're doing is wrong, and that you're better than this, or that this quiet thing, this resilience, this strength that's within you, you need to listen to it, because it's there for a reason. And for me, I've now later on discovered that it is my faith, it is you know my faith that has helped me get through all of this and helps me stay grounded. Hmm.
And what do you think's been the most rewarding part of all of this for yourself? Coming out the other side.
I think first and foremost is obviously that my two eldest sons, they're 11 and 12, they've been able to see me go through this transformation, and they remember me what I was like before, and they see me how I am now. And for me, that's been a beautiful thing, doing things with the kids that I couldn't do before, going to a theme park, going on a roller coaster, being active. I think that's like first and foremost is the biggest reward. And then I guess helping others, using my testimony, and my experience and things that I've been through, and helping others through perhaps things that they're facing it a similar. But that's the biggest, is one of the biggest takeaways is like this desire to serve others now and help others.
That's something I see a lot with people who overcome addiction, and it's a commendable thing. It really is. I think as long as it's channeled in the right way.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who channel it in a incorrect way because they did it for them and they want to share that with somebody else, but that was their journey and they don't necessarily have the skill set for others' journeys. But I think it's a really commendable thing. It's the thing that people do. What would be your final message to someone who's wants to stop, hasn't yet been able to, has so many seeds of self-doubt in themselves? Maybe they're overweight like you were once. Maybe they're stuck in that rut. Maybe they lost a parent like we both did. You know, I don't know what their background is right now, but what's the one thing you'd say to them just to sum up and finalize today?
I'd use an analogy and I'd say to them, you need to think of yourself as a potato. If you think of a potato, it's a very basic root vegetable, but it's a hardy root vegetable. And regardless of the environment you find a potato in, it can be the coldest, darkest cupboard, the dampest cellar. As long as there's a sliver of light, that potato will strive and will grow, will shoot a sprout towards that light and grow. So we are very much like potatoes in the sense that regardless of the environment that we're in, as long as we can see the smallest sliver of light, and that could look like family, it could look like friends, you know, it could look like going to the gym, it could look like faith, community, whatever it may be, find that light and grow your sprout. Because we are able to do it. We are.
Very good. I like it. I think I'd be there's a King Edward potato, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think I'd just be a King Elliott potato.
Yeah.
Jeff Charles, thank you for coming clean with me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for your time. Cheers,
Thank
Elliot.
you.
Thank you.